Ethan Miller walked through the long hotel corridor as the morning sun touched the glass walls, filling the place with soft light. Yet his heart felt heavy and cold because something inside told him that this morning would not end well for him. The hotel was quiet except for the sound of cleaners moving their carts and the faint smell of coffee from the lobby. He had worked here for 5 years, always polite, always early, and never careless. But now the manager had called him to the office, and that was never a good sign. Ethan's fingers trembled as he fixed his tie, trying to stay calm. He remembered last night over and over in his mind how everything happened so quickly, how he could not just walk away from what he saw. It began when a rich guest came into the restaurant demanding a private table. Even though it was full, Ethan had tried to explain gently, but the man shouted and pushed him aside. Then the man turned to a woman sitting alone by the window. She was quiet, elegant, wearing a simple white dress with a silver chain around her neck. Her calm eyes met Ethan's for just a second before the man insulted her in front of everyone, calling her poor and useless something. Inside, Ethan snapped. He had seen rude guests before, but never like this. So he stepped forward and said in a firm voice that the man should stop. The restaurant went silent. The man glared and threatened to have Ethan fired, but Ethan didn't move. He stood beside the woman, protecting her. She whispered thank you so softly that only he heard it. Now walking toward the manager's office, Ethan's stomach twisted. The door opened and his manager, Mr. Roberts, sat behind the big desk, looking serious without a word. He slid an envelope across the table. Ethan stared at it, confused. Then Mr. Roberts said, "You're fired." His voice was cold like metal. Ethan blinked, unable to speak for a moment. He asked, "What did I do wrong?" Mr. Roberts sighed. "You embarrassed one of our VIP guests last night. He complained to the owner and said he'll never visit again." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He tried to explain that the man was being cruel to a woman, and he only stepped in to help, but the manager cut him off, saying, "We can't afford to lose." Guests like that. Ethan wanted to shout that it wasn't fair, but he knew it would make no difference. The hotel didn't care about what was right, only about who had money. He picked up the envelope which held his final paycheck and stood there. Silently for a long moment, the office smelled like old carpet and coffee stains. He remembered all the mornings he opened the hotel early, all the nights he stayed late fixing small things so the guests would never complain now. None of it mattered. As he walked out, the other staff avoided his eyes. Maybe some felt sorry, but no one said a word. He stepped outside into the cold air, his breath visible like smoke. It was strange how quickly a job, a life could end in just a few words. Ethan walked aimlessly through the streets, not sure where to go. He stopped at a small cafe and ordered the cheapest drink just to sit somewhere quiet as he stared out the window. People hurried past outside, everyone busy with their own stories, he thought, about the woman he had helped last night. Her calm voice, her gentle smile, and how she had thanked him before leaving. She had looked like someone important, but he didn't ask her name. He never imagined he would see her again. Now he wondered if she even remembered him. A few hours later, he went back to his small rented room in an old building near the train station. The walls were thin and the heater barely worked. He placed the envelope on the table and sat beside it, thinking what to do. Next, finding another job would be hard. He had no special skills, just honesty and hard work. But sometimes honesty was what got him in trouble. He lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene again and again. Maybe he should have stayed quiet. Maybe he should have ignored it, but deep inside he knew he couldn't have done that. It wasn't in his nature to watch someone be humiliated and pretend it was fine. Outside the window, the city lights began to glow one by one. He thought about calling his old friend to ask for advice, but his pride stopped him. He didn't want to sound weak. Instead, he wrote a note on a small piece of paper, reminding himself tomorrow is another chance. He pinned it on the wall near his bed that night. As rain tapped softly on the window, he heard a car outside but didn't pay much attention, until headlights flashed across his curtain and a shadow moved by his door. Someone knocked, gently. Ethan hesitated, then opened the door and saw a figure. Standing under an umbrella, it was a woman dressed in the same white coat from last night. Her eyes calm but serious. She looked straight at him and said quietly, "You lost your job because of me, didn't you?" Ethan stood frozen, too surprised to answer. She smiled faintly and said, "I am sorry for that." Then she handed him a small card before walking back toward a black car waiting at the end of the street. Ethan looked down at the card. his heart beating faster. The name written in gold letters was Clara Evans, CEO, Evans Group International. He stared at it in shock. The woman he had defended wasn't just anyone she was. Someone who owned everything, and his story was only beginning. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed staring at the golden letters. On the card, his hands trembled slightly as the rain outside grew louder. Every drop felt like a question pounding against his heart. Clara Evans, CEO, Evans Group International. He whispered under his breath, unable to believe that the woman he had defended was someone powerful enough to own half the buildings in the city. His mind swirled with confusion and curiosity. What could she want from him? Why had she come to his old broken apartment? And why had she looked at him like she already knew his story? He turned the card over. There was only an address written neatly in silver ink. No explanation, no message, just a simple note that said, tomorrow 10 a.m. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The rain stopped, but his thoughts kept running. He imagined walking into a big office filled with people in suits who would laugh when they saw him. A man with nothing but a fired badge and tired eyes. But another part of him whispered that maybe this was a chance. Maybe for once his honesty would bring something good. He closed his eyes and promised himself that no matter what happened, he would go. When the morning light came through the window, Ethan put on his cleanest shirt, though it still had a small tear near the collar he polished. His old shoes until they almost shone, and took the early bus downtown. The tall glass towers rose above him, reflecting the sky like mirrors. He had never been inside a place like this before. The security guards at the front desk looked sharp in their uniforms. One of them asked for his name. Ethan showed the card. The guard nodded and said, "Please wait a moment," then picked up the phone within minutes. Another guard arrived and guided him to a private elevator. Ethan's heart pounded as the elevator climbed higher and higher. He could see the city shrinking below him through the glass walls when the doors opened. He stepped into a quiet hallway lined with art pieces that looked more expensive than his entire life. A woman in a black suit approached with a polite smile and said, "Miss Evans is expecting you, please come this way." He followed her down the corridor, trying to stay calm. The door at the end opened and sunlight poured in, revealing a wide office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the whole city. Clara Evans stood near the window holding a cup of coffee, her white coat from last night replaced by a gray business suit that made her look even more commanding. Yet her eyes were still the same calm and kind. Ethan took a hesitant step forward. She turned and smiled slightly, saying, "I see you came, and I'm glad you did. Please sit." He sat across from her, feeling awkward, unsure what to say. She placed the cup down and said, "You were fired because of me, weren't you?" Ethan nodded slowly but said it wasn't her fault. He had made his own choice. She leaned back, studying him with quiet curiosity. "You didn't even know who I was, and still, you stood up for me. That kind of courage is rare." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, not used to praise. He murmured that it was simply the right thing to do. Clara smiled again, but there was something thoughtful in her gaze. After a pause, she said, "I have an offer for you." Ethan blinked, confused. She continued, "I need someone I can trust, someone who will speak the truth even when it's hard to hear. Most people tell me what I want to hear, not what I need to know. You've already proven you're not afraid to do what's right." Ethan's mouth went dry. She reached into a drawer and slid a folder toward him. Inside was a contract with his name typed on it. The salary written in bold numbers made his breath catch. It was triple what he used to earn. Clara said calmly, "I'd like you to work for me as my assistant. You'll learn fast. I can tell you're the kind of man who doesn't give up easily." Ethan stared at the papers, wondering if this was a dream. He said softly, "Why me?" Clara looked out the window, her voice quiet. "Because people like you are hard to find, and when I do find them, I don't let them go." She walked closer and added, "Yesterday I told my team to find out who you were. They said you were honest, hardworking, polite, even under pressure. They said your record was clean." Ethan felt warmth spread in his chest. He couldn't believe anyone had said that about him. Still, he hesitated, unsure if he belonged in a world like this. Clara seemed to read his mind. She said, "Don't let fear stop you. You already stood against someone powerful for what was right." That's the kind of strength my company needs, Ethan. Took a deep breath and nodded, slowly accepting her offer. Over the next hours, Clara introduced him to her staff. She showed him around the modern office where people worked quietly in glass cabins. Everyone seemed respectful when they learned who he was. They whispered with surprise, some even smiled. He was given a desk near Clara's office and a small badge that said, Executive Assistant Ethan ran his fingers over it, feeling proud for the first time in a long time. As the sun began to set, Clara stopped by his desk. She said, I hope today wasn't too overwhelming. Ethan smiled a little, saying it felt like a dream. She replied, Then keep doing what you did yesterday. Keep being brave because not everyone will like you for it. Ethan nodded. Her words stayed in his mind like a promise. When he left the building that evening, the city lights were coming alive below him. He stood for a moment outside the tower, breathing the cool air, thinking about how everything had changed in 24 hours, fired for doing the right thing, and now standing at the start of something new. He didn't know what waited ahead, but deep down, he felt a strange certainty that his story with Clara Evans was only just beginning. Ethan arrived at the tall, glass tower the next morning earlier than everyone else, the lobby lights still dim and the smell of fresh coffee floating in the air. He looked at his new badge again, unable to believe it was real. His name printed neatly under the title, Executive Assistant for Clara Evans. He ran his fingers over it, feeling both nervous and proud. He had never imagined standing inside such a building working for one of the most powerful women in the country. He promised himself that he would not let her down. When Clara stepped out of the elevator later that morning, the room seemed to shift. Everyone straightened their backs and lowered their voices. She nodded at Ethan with a small smile and said, You're early. I like that. Then she walked past him, her confidence calm and quiet, like someone who didn't need to prove anything. Ethan followed her into her office carrying a folder she had asked for earlier. The city stretched wide behind her through the giant window clouds drifting across. Tall buildings like soft shadows. Clara spoke without turning around, saying, Today will be busy. There's a charity event tonight, and I need everything perfect. Ethan nodded, ready to do whatever she needed. The hours passed quickly as he ran from one department to another, helping fix small details, printing schedules, checking decorations, arranging drivers. Clara moved like a storm of grace, giving orders with precision, yet never raising her voice. Ethan noticed how people respected her not out of fear but admiration. She knew every employee by name and asked about their families. She even stopped once to help a cleaner who dropped a box of papers, something no other CEO would ever do. Ethan watched her closely, trying to learn how someone could be so powerful and still so human. By evening, the grand ballroom of the Evans Tower was filled with golden lights and soft music. Guests in elegant clothes filled the room, laughing and greeting one another. Ethan stood near the back watching, quietly. Clara wore a silver dress, simple yet radiant. Her presence made everyone turn. When she entered, she spotted Ethan and gave a small nod of approval that made his heart lift for a moment. Everything felt right. But then, as the speeches began, a man appeared among the crowd. Someone Ethan recognized immediately. It was the rude guest from the hotel. The man who had insulted Clara that night. Ethan's stomach tightened. The man walked confidently toward Clara, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. She looked surprised but greeted him politely. Mr. Kane, I didn't expect to see you here, she said. Ethan kept his distance, watching every movement. Kane laughed loudly, saying, I wouldn't miss such an event, especially when you're the star of the night. Clara's smile stayed calm, but Ethan could see the tension in her eyes. She excused herself after a short moment and walked to the side where Ethan was standing. She whispered quietly, That man is dangerous, but we have to stay. Professional Ethan nodded, though every part of him wanted to throw Kane out of the building. As the night went on, Kane kept circling around trying to get Clara's attention, making jokes with other guests, acting friendly. But Ethan saw something different in his eyes, something sharp and calculating when Clara went to speak with another investor. Kane approached Ethan pretending to be casual. He said, So, you're the brave hotel boy who lost his job because of me. Ethan froze, his fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. Kane smirked, saying, Enjoy it while it lasts. Loyalty doesn't pay for long in this world. Before walking away, leaving Ethan's heart pounding, he didn't understand what the man meant, but the words felt like a threat. Later, when the event ended, Clara thanked Ethan for his help. She said, "You did well tonight. I saw how you handled yourself even when provoked." He blinked, surprised. She had seen everything. She smiled faintly and said, "Never show your anger. In front of people who feed on it, you're learning fast." Ethan felt a rush of respect for her wisdom and strength that night as he left the building. He felt both proud and uneasy. Kane's words kept echoing in his mind. The next morning, Ethan arrived, early again, but the atmosphere in the office felt different. People were whispering hurriedly around corners. Clara's assistant ran to him saying, "There's a problem. The contract files from last night's deal are missing." Ethan's heart jumped. He rushed to Clara's office where she stood by her desk looking calm but her eyes sharp. She said, "We had an important merger agreement prepared for signing today and the main file is gone." Ethan offered to help search. She nodded, saying, "I trust. You find out what happened." Hours passed as Ethan checked every folder, every drawer, every email log. Finally, he went to the security office to review the camera footage. His hands grew cold as he watched the screen, because the person in the video, entering the restricted file room last night, wore a jacket exactly like his Ethan's jacket, the one he had left hanging on the back of his chair before helping at the event. Panic filled his chest. He ran to Clara, trying to explain. She listened, quietly, her face unreadable as she said, "Let the police investigate, they'll find the truth." Ethan tried to speak again, but her assistant stepped between them, saying, "The police are on their way." Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, asking questions. Ethan felt trapped, everyone watching him like he was a thief. He looked at Clara, but she said nothing. Just stood there, eyes calm but distant, as if thinking deeply. He was escorted out of the building the same way he had once been escorted out of the hotel. His mind spinning in disbelief. How could this happen again? As he stepped into the cold air outside, he clenched his fists, remembering Kane's smirk. His words suddenly making sense. "Loyalty doesn't pay for long in this world," Ethan whispered, under his breath, realizing that the storm around him had only just begun. Ethan stood outside the glass tower in the cold morning air, his mind spinning like a storm. Everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, was falling apart again. The police car lights flashed behind him as he waited to be questioned. People from the office stared from the windows, whispering among themselves, some with pity, others with doubt. Ethan kept repeating to himself that he was innocent, but his words felt small against the noise of the world. The memory of the missing files haunted him. He had never even touched them yet. The camera showed someone who looked just like him, wearing the same jacket, the same build, the same movements. And now everyone thought he was guilty. One of the officers asked him to sit on a bench outside while they finished checking the security footage inside. Ethan watched them go and tried to breathe slowly. He remembered Kane's smirk from the night before, those cold words, "Loyalty doesn't pay for long in this world." The meaning was now clear. Kane had set him up, but how could he prove it? He didn't even know where to start after what felt like hours. The officers came out and said they would continue their investigation, and that Ethan should not leave the city until they called again. Then they drove away, leaving him alone in front of the tower. He felt small and broken, like the wind could carry him away. Inside the building, Clara Evans stood by her office window, watching the street below. Her reflection shimmered against the glass. She looked calm to everyone around her, but her mind was racing. She had seen Ethan's reaction. She had seen the confusion in his eyes, and deep down she knew he wasn't lying. Something about the whole situation didn't add up. She turned to her assistant and said quietly, "Call the security head. I want every second of last night's footage, and I want to know who accessed the system in the last 24 hours. Her assistant nodded and hurried away. Clara walked to her desk and opened her laptop. Her fingers moved fast as she searched through files, checking access logs, comparing timestamps until something caught her eye. A strange entry from the night before, signed by Mr. Kane's authorization card, but disguised under a different name. She frowned, realizing that this went deeper than she thought. Meanwhile, Ethan walked slowly through the city streets, not knowing where to go. He stopped by the same small cafe where everything had begun, the place where Clara had found him after he lost his job. He sat by the window watching the rain start again. Small drops sliding down the glass, he felt helpless. The waitress came over and asked if he was all right. He smiled weakly and said, "Just tired." She nodded kindly and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He wondered if Clara believed him, or if she thought he was just another liar trying to play the victim. He wanted to call her to explain again, but he knew it would sound desperate. Back at the tower, Clara met privately with her lawyer. She explained everything that had happened, including the missing files, the fake footage, and her suspicions about Kane. The lawyer listened carefully, then said, "If this is true, we must act quietly. Kane is still a major shareholder, and if we accuse him without proof, it could destroy the company." Clara nodded, her jaw set with determination. She said, "Then we will find proof, and when we do, I'll make sure everyone knows what he did." She leaned back in her chair, her mind already forming a plan. She decided not to tell anyone else, not even Ethan, until she was certain of what she would find. Late that evening, Clara returned to the building after everyone had left, the lights dim, the corridors silent except for the echo of her heels. She carried a small flash drive and a sense of purpose. She went straight to the server room, swiping her card. To unlock the door inside, the cool air hummed with the sound of machines. She plugged the drive into the main console and began tracing the hidden paths in the system. Her eyes narrowed as the screen flickered lines of code revealing what she suspected. Someone had copied the documents and sent them to an outside email linked to a private account owned by Mr. Kane. At the same time, Ethan sat by his small apartment window staring at the street below. When his phone suddenly buzzed, a message appeared. From an unknown number, it said, "Meet me at the old city park near the fountain at midnight. Come alone." Ethan hesitated, fear twisting in his stomach. Maybe it was a trap. Maybe it was his only chance. He grabbed his jacket and stepped into the night, rain falling softly over the empty streets. When he reached the park, the air was cold and silent, only the sound of the fountain breaking the stillness. He looked around and saw a shadow move from behind a tree. Then a familiar voice said quietly, "Ethan, it's me, Clara." He turned, shocked. She was wearing a dark coat, her hair damp from the rain. She walked closer and said, "I found something. I know you didn't take those files." Ethan's eyes widened. She explained everything she had discovered, the fake authorization, the hidden email, the link to Kane. He felt a wave of relief so strong he almost laughed. But Clara placed a hand on his arm and said, "Not yet. We can't confront him until we have proof that he used the data for his own gain. Tomorrow morning there's a board meeting. He will be there and we will end this." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding again, but this time not from fear, from hope. The rain grew heavier, soaking them both, yet neither moved. Clara looked at him, her eyes fierce and calm, saying, "You once stood up for me when no one else did now. It's my turn to stand for you. Together we'll expose the truth." Ethan felt strength return to his chest, as if the weight of every wrong thing was lifting away as they stood in the rain, surrounded by darkness and the soft sound of the fountain. They both knew that tomorrow would decide everything, and that doing the right thing again might finally set them free. The next morning, the city woke under a pale sky filled with slow-moving clouds, while inside the Evans Tower, tension hung like a storm waiting to break. Clara Evans walked through the lobby, her steps calm, but her mind already racing. She knew this day would decide everything. Her company, her reputation, and Ethan's future. She carried a folder in her hand containing the truth she had discovered, the proof that Mr. Kane had framed Ethan for stealing the files and had used fake authorization to cover his tracks. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 sharp, and every director in the company would be there. Ethan arrived early, wearing the same jacket that had caused so much trouble. His heart beating fast. He had not slept the whole night. He kept seeing the image of himself on that security footage and the faces that no longer trusted him. But today he wasn't afraid because Clara had believed in him. She had shown him the evidence in the park, and now they would face everything together. When the elevator doors opened, he saw her already, waiting by the glass conference room, her eyes steady, her voice quiet as she said, "Are you ready?" Ethan nodded and followed her inside. The boardroom was large and filled with a long, polished table under bright lights. The directors sat in neat rows, talking softly until Clara entered. Silence fell immediately. Her presence commanded respect. She sat at the head of the table and opened the folder before her. Mr. Kane sat opposite, smiling confidently, as if nothing could touch him. "Good morning, Clara," he said with false warmth. "I hope today will clear up the misunderstanding." She smiled back and replied, "Oh, I'm sure it will." Ethan stood near the door, his hands clenched behind his back, watching everything. Clara began by thanking everyone for coming. Then she said calmly, "Last night I found the source of the missing files. As you all know, those documents contained sensitive merger data, and their loss could have caused great damage to this company." Mr. Kane leaned forward, pretending concern, and asked, "Did you recover them?" She nodded. "Yes, I did, and I also discovered who tried to steal them." The room went silent. Everyone looked around as Clara pressed a button on the remote. The big screen on the wall came alive, showing lines of security. Footage. The first clip displayed Ethan walking through the hall. The same clip everyone had already seen, but then Clara changed the angle, zooming closer to the figure's face and freezing the frame. "You all saw this image before," she said. "This was used as proof against Ethan Miller, our new executive assistant, but as you can see, the footage was edited. The lighting was altered and parts of the video were replaced with copied frames from a different day. Now watch closely." She switched to another clip showing the real access logs. The name on the system read under a hidden alias, but when decrypted it revealed the authorization code of Mr. Kane. Gasps filled the room. Kane's smile faded as Clara continued. "These documents were copied and sent to a private offshore account registered under his company name." Kane stood quickly, his face red. He shouted, "This is a lie. You have no proof that I sent anything." Clara remained calm and said, "Then let us hear the rest." She pressed another button, playing the audio recording from the security room where Kane's voice was clearly heard instructing a technician to modify footage and delete the original file. The silence that followed was heavy. Every director stared at Kane in disbelief. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. The chairman turned to Clara and said, "Is this verified?" She nodded. "It is all backed up and stored in our legal server at that moment." The door opened and 2 officers entered. Clara had already called them earlier, providing every piece of evidence they needed. The officers walked straight to Kane, informing him that he was under arrest for fraud and tampering with company data. He shouted angrily at Clara, saying, "You'll regret this, you think. You're untouchable," but Clara simply replied, "No, Mr. Kane. I'm just not afraid of doing what's right." The officers escorted him out while the room remained silent. The directors then turned to Ethan, who still stood by the door, unsure what to. One of them said, "Mr. Miller, we owe you an apology. We see now you were innocent." Clara looked at Ethan, her voice soft but steady, saying, "Sometimes truth takes time to reveal itself, but it always does." She walked over to him, placing the folder in his hand, saying, "This belongs to you, because without your courage I might never have found the truth." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to thank her, but the words wouldn't come. The people in the room began clapping lightly, acknowledging his strength and honesty. It was the first time he had felt truly seen. Later that afternoon, Clara and Ethan stood by the large window of her office. The city spread wide beneath them, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Clara said quietly, "You once risked your job to stand for what was right. Now you helped me save everything we built." Ethan smiled slightly, saying, "I just did what anyone should do." She shook her head, saying, "No, not everyone would have had that courage." As they watched the streets, below filled with moving lights and people unaware of the storm that had just ended, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He realized that every loss, every moment of pain, had led him here to this second of peace and justice. Clara looked at him and said, "From now on, I want you by my side, not just as my assistant, but as someone I can always trust. Together, we'll build something stronger." Ethan nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in years, knowing that sometimes doing the right thing might cost you everything at first, but in the end, it gives you back even more than you ever imagined.